Alright, what's up boys and girls? We are going to install Crossfire, which is already installed, the main unit on my radio.
Welcome to
the TBS Diamond installed.
Engine off, macro mode on.
We've already got the main unit installed, set up and all that. We've already installed a receiver, which is in this bag here, in our XLab Steez, and have already tested it and done all that. So what we have today is I'm going to take a Crossfire Nano and I'm going to show you how to install it on a Helio RC IMUF flight controller. Now I had a few troubles getting mine installed yesterday, and so that's why I was going to make this video. Was I wanted to kind of show the issues that I ran into, or at least show how I hooked it up, which was the best way for me. So what I'm going to do is first pull off my old receiver, which is right here. It's this green piece here. And if I bring it a little closer, my lens, I'm zoomed in to really get the best picture here for this video, but I actually have it direct soldered with pins to the board. So I'm gonna go ahead and heat these up and pull them off. All right, so there's that, I got it off. So I'll clean these pads off, make sure they're not shorted out, which happens when you have a lot of solder on there. Separate the pads, pull some excess off. All right, so I'm still gonna use a couple of these pads, but while I'm here, I need to go ahead and tin the RX and TX pad that I'm gonna use for the Crossfire to communicate. Now this is where I went technically wrong last time. I initially hooked them up here just without even really looking at the wiring, thinking I used this pad and the S-Bus pad, but you don't. You're going to use your two power pads, your ground and your 5 volt, but you're going to shift over, and instead of using TX1, you're going to use TX and RX3. So that's going to be in the middle of here. And you can go ahead and use power from these other rails if you want. But for me, I always find that if I'm gonna hook a receiver up, I want it hooked up to the receiver power pads. And the reason why is that's where the flight controller expects the receiver power to go. And so I just wanna make sure I have clean, solid power. And so for me, I'm gonna use those pads over there. But I'm gonna go ahead and I tinned these. So I've got the TX and RX pad tinned. All right, so we have everything primed and ready there. So now what we need to do is take the quad off the table. We're gonna move over to opening up the Nano and the Immortal T that I got with it. So I went ahead and I got, this is the antenna that comes with it. It's the one off the one I already installed. But we went with the Immortal T. It's gonna be your best bet as far as the receiver side antenna. So we have a Crossfire Nano and it's in here. And these things are so small, man, that's crazy. So again, there's the antenna that came with the Crossfire Nano. It's basically, if you can see what an Immortal T is by looking at this, which is really interesting, is essentially it's the stripped signal wire and then the outside shielding separated out, right? So here, you can picture that an Immortal T is just a beefed up version of this. So it's pretty cool to be able to see what it actually looks like. So this is the attenuated antenna that you're supposed to use if you don't use the Immortal T, which we will use. So in your package, you're gonna have the tiny itty bitty Nano receiver, and you're gonna have some wires. The cool thing is they're actually tinned on one end, and that's really good because you'll see that that's the ends that we're gonna use first. We're gonna go ahead, and this is where I'm gonna see if I can get this thing zoomed in, but this thing being so small, let me see. It doesn't really like to zoom in at this distance, but being small, we might get it. Let's see. All right, see, it's not gonna focus very well, it looks like. It's just a little too close. All right, I'm gonna try it there. All right, so I'm gonna find something to. All right, so let me use this little piece of wire here. So the pads that you're looking at here, you're not going to use these. These pads here are channel 3, channel 4, and your 2 BST lines. If you're just trying to hook this thing up straight up to, a beta flight controller or something like that, you do not use those pins. You are going to use your square ground pin, obviously. You're going to use your 5-volt pin, and then you have a I'm sorry, wait, let's look at this again. Sorry. Your ground is over here, your 5-volt, and then you have your number 1 channel and your number 2 channel. Now, the number 1 and 2 channel, we're gonna set up on our Crossfire transmitter once we bind it, and it's gonna tell it that these are our 2 Crossfire signals. Now, this one is the Crossfire transmitter signal. This one is the Crossfire receiver signal. Now, that's somewhat difficult to understand, only because when you connect the transmitter signal from the Crossfire, you connect it to the receiver pad on the board. So you're connecting the receiver pad here to the transmitter pad on the flight controller, and you're connecting the transmitter pad here to the receiver side on the flight controller. I might have just double said that, but you know what I'm trying to say here. So what we're gonna do is, because it's so small and because you got to be very, very careful not to get too much tinning or too much solder on these pads, because of how small they are, you really want to go ahead and use the already pre-tinned wire ends. And so what I mean by the fact that these things you got to be careful is, you can't see it on my screen, but when you get yours, you have these little numbers and letters showing you which pad is what. Those little number and letters are actually grounded signals. If you put too much solder on here to where it touches a little bit of that little letter or number, it's going to actually short out the receiver. And we've heard people do this. So for me, what I did was I made this really simple. I'm gonna actually make sure that all my solder ends up on the bottom side. And so to do that, I'm gonna take my wires and I'm gonna put them through the front with the tinning already there. And then I'm going to, on the back side, I'm gonna just set it down. So here we go. So we're gonna take our wire. This is gonna be my transmitter. I'm gonna use yellow for transmit on Crossfire, and it's gonna go to the receiver pad, right? So I have it through the little hole from the front to the back. And what I'm gonna do, it might tip off, and I'm just gonna tin this thing right here. There we go. Done. Like, it's fully connected. So I've got the transmit. White for me is going to be Crossfire receive. That one's done. The next one, I'm going to double check, but it should be a 5-volt. Yep. It's going to again go through the front, so I don't have to worry about the back side. So, whoop. There we go. This is the one that you got to be careful of, this little chip right here. The regulator. But there we go. Got it. And then the ground wire from the back side. All right. There we go. So we now have fully wired, it's ready to go. This is probably, for me, would be the sketchiest part of this entire process, is tiny wires, tiny solder points, all those things. So I've now got a nice long cable set too. We're gonna go ahead and back the camera out a little bit here. So I've got a nice long cable set, and I'm gonna just trim those once I get them ready. But this is also where you gotta start remembering and thinking about how you're going to install everything and make sure that shrink tubing that comes with it is installed, as well as you got to get the antenna installed where you're going to want it and get the cable routed and ready to plug in. Because the one thing that is important about all of this is this Immortal T for your receiver needs to be positioned really, really well away from carbon. And so for me, what I'm doing is I actually have somewhat of a holder in this XT60 pad holder right here, right? So I've got a hole that it's gonna run through.
Activity alarm.
Once it runs through it, it's gonna go through the top plate. I'm gonna have to run the top plate through it, and then it's gonna be connected to the receiver, and then I'm gonna heat shrink everything. So I've got a little bit more of a process to do, but we're not gonna get to that yet. I just wanted to show you that the first thing you do should not be necessarily to shrink wrap it and put the antenna on, because you really gotta think about how you're gonna actually run the antenna. So what I will do though, is I do wanna go ahead and trim the shrink wrap that I'm going to use to the size I want. For me, I cut about 1 inch off, maybe 3/4 of an inch. I wanted mine to be a little long because I wanted it to overlap on both ends and really kind of pinch down on the Immortal T UFL. So we have this, we have everything ready there. We're gonna get our quad over here and we're gonna decide where is this receiver gonna end up needing to be. Well, for my Steves, what I did was it ends up that this receiver fits really nice still right here. So I think really mine's gonna end up in this position. So I don't really need too long of wires. I'm gonna go ahead and say that I need about that much wire. So we'll trim these wires, get them exposed, we'll tin them, and then we'll drop them on the pads. And really, once we're there, it's just a matter of buttoning up and getting the receiver updated. And so it's pretty simple after that, once you have everything set up where it goes. Like I said, it's really important on the Helio RC FC to go ahead and use receiver 3. I tried this on receiver 1, it didn't work. Receiver 5 is where, or UART 5 is where I'm running my smart audio, so I can't run that. So when I talked to the developers about the issues I was having, they recommended that I run receiver UART 1 or UART 3. When I did, everything worked out just fine. So we've got our pre-tinned wires. I am gonna clip, make sure I'm doing it over my build, but don't. Clip the little tips off, just to get them the right size. All right, and then, here we go. So we got ground. Wait, nope, that's power. Ground. Power, which is 5 volt. All right. And then this is where, again, you got to remember TX is my yellow, but I'm going to connect it to RX. So it goes here. And then RX goes to the other pad, which is the TX3 pad. All right, real quick. I soldered my wires one pad over, so they're on the wrong pads. I actually have the Crossfire receiver on the Crossfire, on the transmitter for our pad for UART 3, and then I actually have the other pad on RX2. So I need to actually shift these over. It's my fault for not paying 100% attention. It's also because I have a smart audio wire running on this one that's not to the same pad. But so I'm gonna fix this real quick. I'm gonna change my smart audio to where it's out of the way a little more. All right, so smart audio is fixed. Now I just need to shift each of these over one. All right. All right, back to the bench. We'll get this fixed up. So before we actually take this thing over to the bench and set up Betaflight, there is one thing that we have to do. We have to actually bind the receiver. And so we're gonna go ahead and test power, but I don't wanna plug a battery into it and, you know, for some reason smoke a bunch of stuff. So if something were to be wrong or messed up, you know, again, I'm going to go ahead and use the USB. That way, if anything smokes, it's the receiver and the flight controller only, but it shouldn't. So here we go. Plugged in, you see the lights light up. Cool. So power on Crossfire.
Throttle warning. Engine
Oops.
off. Acro mode on.
It's on, it's coming on and booting up. I'm going to change my model and set this up. So let me go ahead and get this out and see if I can show you. So here we're going to go to menu. I'm going to select my BRAP. Get over there. Remember guys, props off. Props off.
Engine off. Acro mode on.
All right. So we're going to go into the menu. I'm going to go page. We're going to go up. We're going to go to external. We're going to turn that to CRSF, Crossfire. Hit enter. Now the Crossfire is not bound yet, right? So we need to hold this and we're going to go to bind. All right. I'm going to click it. Oh. It's binding. It's looking for it. So it's now saying update available. The receiver needs to be updated. So we're going to hit OK. Do not do anything following this process, or do not interrupt the following process. We're going to hit OK, and it's going to start counting down and updating that receiver. And so it is now updating the receiver. Do not unpower it. Do not do anything. Honestly, you should just let it sit there. It's going to take a few minutes, maybe a minute, minute and a half more. We will then have to do a quick other few things. We'll set it up for being ready to transmit the Crossfire signals and receive them. And then we'll take this thing and we'll go over to the bench, to the computer, and we'll go ahead and hook it up there and show you the final kind of settings to get this thing connected and talking. All right. It says it's loading. Receiver is uploading the last, uploading itself with whatever. It's complete. Basically telling you not to do anything. Boom. So it is now connected, and it says link state connecting, TX power 10 milliwatt, RC input Crossfire. So it is pretty much good to go. It's not connected talking yet, but it's good to try. So what we'll do, let's see what happens when we unplug and plug that bad boy back in now. I'll try a bind again just to see. It's asking me. I'm not 100% sure. All right, so I'm not sure why, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do this because I bumble through these things. Yesterday, this all worked fine on the first try, so we're gonna go ahead and try this again. Do not interrupt, press OK. It's preparing the receiver. It's gonna update again. All right. Link state running. There we go. All right, I'm not sure what I did before, but it just didn't like the update. So it now is updated. It's now connected. We now can go start talking to the board. Before we do, there is one more thing that we got to do. So you're gonna hold the button to get into the menu. Now that it's bound and set up, you'll see that it has Nano RX. It knows that it's connected to. So we're going to go to that. And this is where we do channel mapping, or I'm sorry, output mapping. And we change output 1 to CRF to Crossfire, right? And so cycle through. Oh, there we go. Crossfire. When you do that, you'll notice it says Crossfire TX, Crossfire RX, again, on those pads. So it automatically sets that up for you. Now, the other thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to channel, oops. Sorry, we're gonna go to channel map, and we're gonna go down to channel 8, and we're gonna change it. We're gonna make it RSSI. There we go. So we've got all that, and we're gonna back out of that. We're also gonna set failsafe set. All right. So now we've got RSSI coming out. We've got crossfire signals going in and out. And so now we're ready to take it to the bench and hook it up and basically do the final thing with Betaflight. Now remember, I'm not gonna show you this final step that we do as far as relocating my antenna because it's specific to my build, but don't worry about doing the placement or anything until you get everything talking to each other, you make sure it's gonna arm and everything's working, then finalize your antenna placement and your receiver placement, and then shrink tube everything down once you're 100%. Nothing worse than ruining this really great TBS shrink tube and having to cut it back off. So we'll head over to the bench. You'll see the last couple of steps, and that's it. All right, so we're gonna go into Butterflight because Butterflight's what I'm using. I'm again doing this on a fully working and functioning flying quad, so it is basically just removing one receiver, adding a new receiver, going in and changing all the ports and the setup. But besides that, it's really not that difficult. So where we got to start is before you go and change your protocol to Crossfire, Butterflight, Betaflight, whatever flight, always wants you to set the port first. So we're going to move over to the ports tab, and we're going to remember that we connected it to RX and TX3, which is UART3. We're going to change the UART from where it is now for the serial RX to that one. We're going to save and reboot it. So now we've got everything talking to itself on this. And so now when we go over to the configuration tab and set the protocol, it's still going to be a serial receiver, but it's going to be switched to Crossfire. And when we do that, we need to check that telemetry is turned on as well. Just it should be already, but you're going to want to make sure. You're going to save and reboot that. And then the last step is really to go double check your receiver tab, start moving your controls, verify that all your channels are there and all of that, and that they're aligned right. And if they're not, then you go over to your little drop down and you can change here, or you might, depending on, you know, for me, I didn't really have to change anything, but you might need to go into your radio and adjust some of the channels to fix them. But for most people, if you're working on a quad that's functioning before with a receiver, this should just be plug and play pretty much. So if that's all working and everything's good, then the last step is to really connect OSD stuff and all that. And for that, you can go get that information somewhere else, I'm sure. I really just wanted to show the quick and simple installation and how, you know, the tips on getting this Nano Crossfire system working with a full-size Crossfire. Hope it helps.